Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems that shape our world. Today, we're diving into Thom Hartmann's book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, to do a systems-level overview of American gun culture and its deep constitutional roots.
So, let's kick things off with a pretty provocative quote that the book uses to frame its entire analysis. The core idea here is that if you really want to understand the gun debate, you can't just skim the surface. You have to dig way deeper into the historical roots and, just as importantly, the powerful economic incentives that are shaping everything today.
To help us do that, the book gives us this fantastic metaphor. Think of the Second Amendment itself as a kind of foundation stone. Now, by itself, its meaning isn't really fixed. Instead, its function, its whole purpose, is defined by the political and economic building we, as a society, decide to construct around it over the centuries.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll follow a 5-part analysis, starting with the system's hidden architecture, then its incentives. From there, we'll look at the outcomes it produces, how it keeps itself going, and finally, how it connects to even larger systems in our society.
Okay. First things first, we have to be really clear about what system we're even talking about. This means we have to get beyond the simple pro-gun versus anti-gun shouting match and actually look at all the interconnected pieces that make up the whole machine.
So here it is. Hartmann's analysis defines this system as a specific kind of architecture, one that's both constitutional and cultural. It directly links the original purpose of early militias with racial hierarchy, the massive influence of corporate lobbying, and, of course, the gun policies we argue about today. The key is that these aren't separate issues. They're all components wired into a single, integrated system. Now, to really understand why any system works the way it does, you have to follow the incentives. What's driving it? And in this case, the book argues that the incentives have changed, well, dramatically over the years.
The source material really draws a sharp contrast between two different sets of incentives. The early incentives for having a well-regulated militia, it argues, were explicitly tied to two things: controlling enslaved populations and enforcing territorial expansion. Fast forward to today, and the modern incentives are driven by something else entirely: industry profit and the power of political mobilization.
And to back up that claim about early incentives, the book points to actual colonial laws, like this one from Georgia. It literally required armed militias to conduct slave patrols. The argument being presented is that this function was a huge reason why that militia clause was so non-negotiable for the southern states.
All right, so you have this architecture and these incentives. What does a system like that actually produce? Let's talk about the outcomes, because these aren't random accidents. They're the predictable, logical results of how the system is designed. Hartmann's book lays out 4 key structural outcomes. You get persistent racial disparities in how gun laws are actually enforced. You get a fundamental legal reinterpretation of what the Second Amendment even means. You get this deeply entrenched partisan identity built around gun ownership. And you get these recurring cycles of mass violence. Let's dig into that first outcome. The analysis points way back to the end of the Civil War, when Southern states passed what were known as Black Codes, specifically to disarm newly freed African Americans. It shows how, from the very beginning, the right to bear arms was systematically denied based on race.
And, this isn't just ancient history. That same dynamic echoes right into our own time. The book brings up the tragic case of Philando Castile, a licensed, legal gun owner who was killed by a police officer right after he calmly did everything he was supposed to do and informed the officer of his firearm. It's presented as a stark modern example of how this right is so often applied unequally.
Now for that second outcome, legal reinterpretation. This is a huge one. It all centers on one pivotal moment: the Supreme Court's 2008 Heller decision. This case fundamentally rebuilt the architecture around our foundation stone. For the first time in over 2 centuries, it established a private, individual right to own a gun for self-defense, completely separate from serving in a militia.
And that shift, that massive leap from a collective, militia-based right to this broad, individual one, well, that right there is the crisis in perception that the book's entire analysis is built around. The meaning of the foundation stone was officially and radically changed.
So, how does a system like this stick around? How does this brand new interpretation not only survive, but actually get stronger over time? Well, the book argues the answer is a really powerful, self-reinforcing feedback loop.
This loop has 4 basic steps that feed into each other. It all starts with industry funding. That money fuels coordinated advocacy. That advocacy then pushes for and influences judicial reinterpretation, and finally, those court decisions are cemented through cultural myth-making, which in turn drives more political support and gun sales, and the cycle starts all over again.
And you can actually watch this loop play out across recent history. The source points to the 1970s, when the NRA transformed from a club for sportsmen into a powerhouse lobbying arm for the gun industry. That led directly to its first-ever presidential endorsement in 1980, and the whole thing culminated in its core legal theory becoming the law of the land with that 2008 Heller decision.
Okay, for our final step, we need to zoom out. We have to connect this specific system to the much broader operating system of American society. Because, of course, the gun debate doesn't just happen in a vacuum.
As Hartmann writes, the playbook we've been looking at is not unique. This quote makes it crystal clear that the whole strategy of using corporate money to rewrite laws and shape public opinion is a common feature across tons of different industries in the American economy.
So the book really presents the gun debate as a symptom that gets magnified by these much larger systems. Corporate political power provides the money, the lobbying playbook. Racialized enforcement structures create those disparities in who really gets to exercise their rights. Media polarization profits from all the conflict. And economic inequality can fuel the fear and desperation that drives so much of the cultural side of this debate. So, when you put it all together, the crucial point is this. According to this analysis, the fight isn't just about guns. It's really a case study in how immense financial power can actively reshape constitutional law, cultural identity, and even our fundamental perception of reality itself.
Which leaves us with one last big question. If the architecture built around that constitutional foundation stone was intentionally taken apart and redesigned once to serve a whole new set of incentives, could it, through a different kind of effort, ever be redesigned again?
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.